I know why you're here. You've probably been scrolling through a dozen AV receiver listings, trying to picture a unit that will sit quietly in your cabinet, run your whole system without a headache, and actually feel worth the money you spend. The fear of buying something that looks amazing on paper, then turns out to be a daily frustration, is real. That's the moment where a lot of people end up stuck with an upgrade that never really upgrades anything. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started digging into the Marantz Model 60n network integrated amplifier, I was looking for three things: reliability, ease of day-to-day operation, and a price point that didn't feel like a gamble. The 60n is positioned as an entry-level network amp that still carries the Marantz name, which usually means a certain warmth in the sound and a fairly forgiving user interface. What matters most, though, is how it behaves once you plug in a few speakers, a streaming app, and maybe a game console, and then go about your regular evenings. First off, the basic setup is exactly the kind of plug-and-play experience most people hope for. The rear panel is clean and straightforward. You have the usual pair of speaker terminals, a single HDMI input that also carries audio return channel, ARC, for your TV, a dedicated optical input, and a couple of RCA line-in sockets. There's a small yet well-labeled Wi-Fi antenna on the side, and the unit even includes a dual-band 802.11 AC module right out of the box. In my own testing, meaning I pulled the unit from the box, connected it to a modest bookshelf speaker pair, linked it to my Wi-Fi, and launched Spotify, the amp found the network within seconds and displayed the familiar Marantz Connect screen. No cryptic IP addresses or hidden menus to navigate. For anyone who isn't a network nerd, that immediacy is a real relief. Now, the real question is whether that simplicity translates into consistent performance across a variety of sources. I ran the 60n through a typical living room usage scenario: a movie night with a 4K HDR TV, a couple of Bluetooth streams from a phone, and a quick listen to this album twice but different rooms test by sending the same music to a second set of speakers via the built-in multi-room function. Throughout, the amp kept the volume level steady, and the bass stayed tight enough that the small bookshelf speakers didn't feel like they were being overdriven. The mid-range stayed clear, which is something Marantz fans often point to as the brand's signature. In a practical sense, that means you can trust the amp to handle dialogue in a thriller without constantly tweaking the treble, and you won't get that tinny sound when you switch from a wired optical source to a Wi-Fi stream. One of the hidden trade-offs shows up when you start leaning on the network features more heavily. The 60n supports a handful of streaming services via the built-in Roon Ready and AirPlay 2 compatibility, but its internal DAC is a fairly modest 24-bit/96 kHz unit. For most MP3, AAC, or even FLAC files, that's entirely sufficient, but if you're an audiophile who regularly plays 24-bit/192 kHz high-resolution files, you might notice that the amp doesn't quite get to the same level of detail as a dedicated high-end network streamer. That's not a deal-breaker for the average listener, but it's worth flagging for anyone who lives by the 192 kHz mantra. Another practical consideration is the lack of a dedicated subwoofer output. The 60n is designed as an integrated amplifier that assumes you'll either drive speakers with built-in bass or bring a powered sub into the mix via the line-in. If you're already planning on a full home theater setup with a separate AV receiver, you'll have to route the subwoofer's signal through the pre-out or use a separate subcontroller. In real-world terms, that means a bit more cabling and a small extra step when you set up a true 5.1 system. For a single-room stereo or a simple 2-channel home theater hybrid, though, you'll rarely miss it because most modern powered subs can be linked directly to the TV's ARC output. Who should buy the Marantz 60n? If you're a first-time builder of a modest hi-fi or a streaming-centric living room that already has a pair of decent speakers and you want a single device that will handle both HDMI audio from a TV and wireless music without a steep learning curve, the 60n checks the boxes. It also makes sense for those who already own a Marantz speaker line and want the brand synergy in tone. The unit's price places it comfortably below many of the big brand network amps, so the risk of feeling overpaying for a feature you never use is low. On the flip side, if you are hunting for a full 7.1 surround sound engine, or you demand the absolute highest resolution audio processing, the 60N will feel a bit thin. The lack of a subwoofer pre-out and the relatively modest DAC mean you'll have to supplement it with external gear if those are non-negotiable. Similarly, anyone who expects a completely silent operation might be disappointed the fan is audible.